for this session, we're going to turn our attention to learning all of the different ways to connect writing activities with reading. This online meeting coincides with chapters 10, 24, 25, and 26 of our textbook. All right, we're going to go ahead and begin with a writing timeline, and we're going to start off a little bit before the 1970s. This is a time when teachers did all of the correcting and watched for grammatical, spelling, and punctuation errors. During the 1970s, experts denounced students' compositions as too dull, and teachers were encouraged and were provided opportunities to teach and instruct students with creative writing. Then we move along into the 1980s. We enter a time when we can mark the decade with a few buzzwords, such as process writing and writer's workshop. A few extra terms from this time period have even been adapted and have endured to this time. Writing steps are often the focus of lessons, and the term writer's workshop has resurfaced. These workshops may deal with one targeted writing skill, such as eliminating tired, overused words, or using the tool of writer's workshop to help students to incorporate more figurative language and imagery into their compositions. Writer's workshops use lots of different elements, but they used to mostly focus on pre-writing, composing, revising, rewriting, and publishing, and terms like sloppy copy and final version and publish corner were used. Then we fast forward a few decades and we reach the year 2000, which includes the No Child Left Behind, the PSSAs, and now the even higher stakes tests such as the Keystone exams. This has caused focus to shift now towards teaching students a modified process writing in order to help them to compose those kinds of paragraphs and even essays in response to prompts on the higher stakes tests that require these specific modes of writing. To prepare students for high stakes assessments, teachers need to teach paragraph structure, essay structure, and teach students how to respond to the particular type of prompt usually associated with essay or paragraph responses. One way to do this is through the use of the Sandwich graphic organizer. This helps younger students to write paragraphs, and it can be adapted for older students, even college level students, to organize their writing before they begin to write a final copy. This graphic prompts students to use topic sentences, details, and concluding sentences. All right, for most of the high stakes tests, the writing prompts will fall under one of the following categories: narrative, descriptive, expository, persuasive, or compare and contrast. So it is wise to prepare students for these types of writing styles. We're going to take a closer look at each one. And then there is another new type of prompt that's kind of a version of the compare and contrast that asks students to compare two separate texts and to provide evidence for their statements. Many elementary students have an extremely difficult time combining comparison with evidence support from the text that they have read. All right, the first type of prompt is referred to as the narrative or recount. The purpose of this kind of prompt is to elicit from students an account of an incident. The order is chronological, so the transition words that should be used are first, second, third, and so on. An example of a narrative prompt would be write a paragraph about what you did the last time you had a day off of school. Next is the descriptive prompt. It has a separate purpose, which is to provide information about a person, a place, or a thing. The order is considered spatial. Transition words would be in the foreground, in the middle distance, etc. An example of a descriptive prompt would be write a paragraph which describes your favorite room. Then we have the expository format. This would be the type of prompt that would ask students to explain or clarify their ideas. The order of the essay, or the way that they would organize their paragraph or essay, would be order of importance. So the words would be first, second, last, and mainly. An example prompt would be write a paragraph explaining how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And then we have persuasive. The purpose is to convince the reader of a certain point of view. Order, once again, is importance. And the transition words that we want to teach students to apply to a persuasive writing is mainly, more important, most important, better, and best. The persuasive prompt has its own purpose, which is to convince a reader of a certain point of view. I always tell students that they are probably the best at this prompt type because of all the practice they have trying to persuade their parents to get them to do what they want to do. Here's an example of a persuasive prompt. And it is, the teachers in your school are considering eliminating recess from the school day. Write a paragraph persuading the teachers to keep or eliminate recess from the schedule. And then we have compare and contrast prompts. And the purpose is to ask students to examine similarities and differences. And the order is considered logical. The transition words in contrast, on the other hand, similarly, whereas, likewise, etc., etc. Compare and contrast is making a comeback with the core standards and focus on fiction versus nonfiction, and also in combination with other kinds of strategies. One example would be compare and contrast the act of composing letters to using email to communicate with friends and family. An example of the more complex compare and contrast prompts is one that would ask students to read condensed biographies of both Muhammad Ali and Neil Armstrong. The students must then define a hero and decide which one of these men, they can choose both, is a hero, and support their statements with evidence from their reading. To receive high marks on the rubric, students must accomplish all parts of the prompt asked of them. For example, if a student decides that Neil Armstrong is a humble hero because he saved men in war, he went to the moon, and he did not brag, this would not fulfill the requirements unless the writer specifically supported their findings with direct words from Neil Armstrong's biography. Additionally, they would need to explain and support with text, with quotes or paraphrasing from Muhammad Ali's biography, why Ali would be a confident type of hero who never doubted himself. And again, they couldn't just write about this and sort of vaguely refer to the biographies. They would need to show specific text support from the biographies to get the full points for that rubric. Another way to help students integrate writing with intermediate readers is to use 6-trait writing. Vicki Spandl was the co-director of a teaching team that developed the 6-trait model and has designed instructional writing materials for all grade levels. She was a language arts teacher, a journalist, and an author. We're going to take a look at the 6 traits that you can teach students and use to create rubrics for writing. In upcoming sessions, hopefully we will have time to take a look at some different ways to incorporate and create rubrics with our students. All right, ideas is the first or one of the 6 traits. The ideas are the heart of the message, the content of the piece, the theme, together with the details that enrich and develop that theme. Next is voice. The voice is the heart and soul, the magic and the will, along with the feeling and conviction of the individual writer coming out through the words. The best way to teach a voice is to have students experience lots of different readings from poetry, prose, and also different types of writing, so that they can become acquainted with what voice is and how to determine what kind of voice is being used. Organization is the internal structure of a piece of writing, the thread of the meaning, the logical and sometimes intriguing patterns of the ideas, beginning, middle, and end, a good sequence. Then we have word choice. Word choice is the use of rich, colorful, precise language that moves and enlightens the reader. It's trying to avoid and eliminate those tired words that occur in writing. Sentence fluency is the rhythm and flow of the language, the sound of the patterning, the way in which the writing plays to the ear, not just to the eye. It's using a variety of sentences, not just always the same subject, verb, direct object, simple sentences, but using complex sentences along with simple sentences. Conventions are the mechanical correctness of the piece, spelling, grammar, usage, topic sentence, paragraphs, capitals, and punctuation. Now we're going to take a look at some other ways to incorporate writing and language arts and beyond in other content areas. These are ideas that can be incorporated in language arts, mainly, but also in history and science, social studies. So as you can see, we have writer's workshop, mini lessons, dictated writing, language experience approach, journal writing, interactive writing, which is share the pen, write alouds, and making take-home books. I'm going to take a closer look at some of these. One of the ways to incorporate writing with intermediate students and younger students is to incorporate the new type of writer's workshop, which narrows the focus to one area. This picture is from a link that I will post on Brightspace that shares a more specific objective for a writer's workshop. That way you'll be able to watch an example in action. Another great way to encourage writing with intermediates is the language experience approach. This approach was originated by Marie Montessori. Charting students' exact words in order to record experiences increases their phonological awareness and alphabetic principle. As our strategies resource concerning language experience approach attests, there are many activities that can coincide with this strategy, such as separating the story into sentence strips and having students reconstruct their stories. Writing aloud is another excellent way for students to benefit from the writing style of great authors, and a way for them to explore in a very safe way experimenting with different voices that they can kind of just copy from authors. It gives them permission to do that. Writing aloud is a shared experience between the teacher and the children. The teacher thinks aloud as she demonstrates the composing process and invites students to apply problem-solving strategies for working on words within the text. Through clear demonstration and active participation, the children learn what writers do, and the use of this knowledge in independent journal writing activities. When should we use write-alouds? They can be taught with children very early and in the beginning stages of reading and writing. A write-aloud example is going to follow, but first a little bit of a rationale. From a Vygotskian perspective, the teacher uses language to describe the writing process. Through teacher modeling and active engagement, the children acquire important knowledge for constructing and monitoring their own independent writing. The purpose of the teacher's writing aloud includes demonstrating the composing process with an emphasis on building a meaningful message for the audience, demonstrating rereading strategies for checking and clarifying meaning, modeling how to do close retellings of a storybook that include all important elements and expressive dialogues for recording an interesting news story, and demonstrating how to use figurative language in written compositions. All right, we have an example. It's Not Easy Being a Bunny is a wonderful predictive book about PJ Funny Bunny. Doesn't appreciate being a bunny at all. He wishes to change, and he leaves home to decide what kind of animal he will become. He attempts to live with bears and possums and skunks. However, he doesn't like to hibernate, to hang upside down, to smell bad. So he decides, finally, it's just best to stay a bunny. My class loved this book, so we decided to construct a write-along, and it's called It's Not Easy Being a Kid. And it sort of went like this. Room 13 was very sad. They did not like being kids. Their teacher made them do homework every night, and they had far too many jobs to do. So it starts off very much like It's Not Easy Being a Bunny, because that story starts off explaining all the little complaints that PJ Funny Bunny had. Their desks were too hard. One day, Room 13 decided to leave school. We don't want to be kids anymore, said Room 13. We want to be teachers. And Room 13 went to the teacher's lounge. But the teachers have to grade papers, make bulletin boards, and supervise lunch duty. Being a teacher was not all fun and games. So Room 13 said, we don't want to be teachers anymore. We want to be... And so it goes on just like PJ Funny Bunny, where it's very predictive. He decides each time not to be that particular animal and finally comes back to wanting to be a bunny. And just like the story that my students and I wrote, It's Not Easy Being a Kid. It basically gives you permission to learn how to be a great writer by basically copying what the great writers do. But eventually students start to incorporate different parts of great authorship into their own compositions. Another way to integrate writing with intermediate students is to use dialogue journals. Dialogue journals are something that we have been using in our current course. For a whole group, it is best to try to write back and forth at least once every 2 weeks with your students. And then there are some additional guidelines that you can read. At any time, you can pause this, take a break, or pause to take notes, pause just to pause, and then come back to these later. Basically, I'm trying to make each of them less than 25, or between 20 and 25 minutes. Okay, moving on. There is another great way to use journals with students, and this is double journal entries. Double entry journals allow students to make connections with what they are reading. One side of the paper is dedicated to a direct response to what has been read, and the opposite side encourages students to make connections in their personal lives. And we have an example. This is a double journal entry from a student who's reading Pilgrim's Progress. The main character is Christian. The biggest trial he faces on his journey was his fear of lions that blocked his path. He had to pass by the lines to get to a beautiful mansion where he could rest for a while before continuing on his journey. Finally, after being afraid for a very long time, he walked by the lions which could not hurt him. They were chained and forced to stay by the side of the path. Then the student connects this to their life by writing about the most difficult trial that they had ever faced. And it is when their cousin's dog was hit by a car in front of their house. And they eventually made a picture collage of the dog and framed it. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't think of her. She was just one of those very special dogs. And finally, we look at making books before we complete this session. If I've taught any course that you have ever taken, you have heard about take-home books. The benefits are many and include students create something that they own. They can contribute to the uniqueness of the book. It is usually a book on their level because it is easy to differentiate when you're creating books. They do read it and reread it, which, as we know, increases fluency and comprehension. So lots of good ideas on this screen that you can pause, and lots of benefits for making take-home books. This completes our meeting on writing ideas for intermediate students. Be sure to include a writing activity in your final project. Also be sure to access all the meetings and to take the exam. It's really a quiz, but Brightspace only allows me to call it an exam in Brightspace. This will serve as your attendance and counts for points for your final grade. You may take the exam 2 times, and feedback will be visible after everyone has taken it. One idea to help with the exam is to take notes during the instructional videos as you listen. Also, since each one is hopefully under 20 minutes, you could listen to them more than one time. Thank you again.